everyone, welcome to the Oaklards YouTube channel. My name is Jessica. Today we're actually doing a viewer requested pattern. This little cutie is the Clematis Wristlet by Blue Calla. It is an adorable little pouch. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to walk through the pattern step by step, making it exactly as they suggest. Then at the end, I'm going to add on a little adjustments to kind of change it up a little bit to make it easier for beginners, and in my opinion, just give it a little bit more polished of a look. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know that I did reach out to Blue Calla, and Celine did give me permission to film a tutorial for this pattern only. Don't ask me about the Speedwell. I can't film a tutorial for the Speedwell. But for the Clematis Wristlet, I am allowed to film a tutorial. I don't receive anything in return for it. The entire reason I'm filming this tutorial today is because I had many people send me messages asking me to provide a tutorial for this bag. I would like to let you know that there is a very thorough tutorial already available on YouTube. It's by Debbie Hunker. She has 2 parts. I'll have both of those linked below. I will have the link for the pattern and I will have the link for Blue Calla's website. I will have all the links for everything down below. This pattern is a free pattern on the Blue Calla website, and it is marked as a beginner pattern. I wouldn't call this a beginner pattern. I think that this is a decent beginner bag, but the way the pattern is written, it can be very challenging for beginners, which is why I think I've been getting a lot of requests for a tutorial for this bag. Now, full disclosure, I don't write bag patterns, so it's hard for me to criticize patterns, but I am a forever beginner, and if I'm having a hard time understanding what to do, actual beginners are going to have a hard time understanding what to do. And one of the things that's most important to me is that I don't want actual beginners to get discouraged with bag patterns. So what I'm saying is, if this is your first time making a bag, you bought a machine, you know how to turn it on, you know how to kind of stitch, but this is your first bag you're ever making, and you see that it's marked beginner bag pattern and you can't get through it because you can't understand what you're supposed to do, some beginners are going to think that bag making is just not for them. Like, this is supposed to be a beginner pattern. I'm supposed to be able to get through this, and I don't know what to do. The pattern is written really well for somebody who has more experience working with patterns, but maybe not for you. And as we go through the pattern, I'm going to let you know where those areas are, where some of the missing information is. The bag is really, really cute. Okay, let's just make sure we all know that. The result is adorable. The result is sellable, all right? This is a design and a sturdiness and a cute factor. You know, it's super cute. Before we dive into the tutorial, if you haven't already subscribed, please click the subscribe link down below. If you enjoyed this video, if at any point you like it, just give it a like. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. Let me remind you that the first comment down below will have timestamps for every single part of this video. I'm breaking it down into a lot of steps, and at the end, I'm going to have my additional changes if you wanted to insert that into one of those steps. So just click on the timestamp and it's going to take you straight there in the video. You don't have to scroll through to the number. You just click it and takes you right there in the video. All right, let's get started. The first thing you need to do is print off the pattern. When you print this off, make sure you use Adobe Acrobat Reader and print it off at 100%. This is going to make sure the pattern pieces match up appropriately. After you print the pattern, the very first thing I want you to do is put some page numbers on this. There's about 9 pages of instruction, including the title page. I don't put page numbers on the templates because I use those to cut out. I will be referring to the instructions by page numbers. So if you do this right off the bat, it's going to help you follow along with my instructions. Make sure you print out your templates. After you print them out, go ahead and check your 1-inch square to make sure it measures up on a 1-inch by 1-inch square ruler. After you print out your templates, go ahead and cut them out. If you are going to be making a lot of these bags, I do suggest you trace these onto some plastic and use that as a template. You should have 4 pieces: your lining, piece C, your exterior bottom, piece B, your exterior top, piece A, and your slip pocket, piece D. So some of the first things you're going to need is a zipper foot. I like to use 40 weight thread with all of my bags. Make sure your bobbin and your top thread are the same color because we will be doing a lot of top stitching, and sometimes you might find it easier to top stitch from the reverse side. You want to make sure your thread lines up correctly. I like to use a color that's going to blend nicely with the bag. I don't really like prominent top stitch colors just because my lines are not always perfectly straight and I don't need to advertise that. So now looking at page 2, we're going to go down the list of requirements. You're going to need a fat quarter of exterior fabric. This can be quilt cotton, quilt canvas, probably cotton lycra if you want to be crazy. This is going to be the main part of the bag. For the accent, you're going to need a 12-inch by 8-inch piece of vinyl. This is a very thick vinyl that I got from Meekry World. I'll have a link for it down in the description below. You're going to need a fat quarter of quilt weight cotton for the lining. We're going to have two kinds of interfacing for this project. The first one is just a fusible interfacing that's going to add a little bit of structure and prevent stretch with your material. A lot of people like to use Pellon SF101. I prefer cotton woven or woven fuse by Barb's Bags. I'll have a link for this down in the description below. I just find that it's as much bigger. You get kind of more bang for your buck, and it's more lightweight than SF101, but still provides the sturdiness. Also, it seems to fuse quicker than SF101. And you're also going to need some fusible fleece, and this is going to be for the exterior of the bag to provide some extra structure. For your notions, you're going to need a zipper. Now, it requires an 8-inch zipper. If you're using a plastic zipper, you can really use any size that is 8 inches or bigger. For example, this zipper here is a 12-inch zipper, but we can cut it down later. If you're using a metal zipper, you're going to want to make sure you get a proper 8-inch zipper to prevent having to sew over the metal teeth. I get all of my zippers from Zip It on Etsy. I will have a link for them down in the description below. The pattern calls for a 5/8 of an inch D-ring. I don't have any 5/8 of an inch D-ring, and I didn't see any online, so I'm using a 3/4 of an inch D-ring, which works perfect with the size of the D-ring strap in this pattern. So if you can't find a 5/8 of an inch D-ring, go ahead and get yourself a 3/4 of an inch D-ring. The last piece of hardware is a 1-inch swivel clip. I get pretty much all of my hardware from Emmeline Bags, and I will have a link for that down in the description below. Like we said in the beginning, make sure you print off all 4 of your pattern pieces, checking that they are the right size by using the 1-inch by 1-inch box provided on the pattern. If you want to use these more than once, you can get a very flexible, thin cutting mat and go ahead and trace these onto that and cut it out, and that's going to help make sure that your pattern pieces withstand a lot of use. So using pattern piece A, you're going to cut on the fold of your fabric to create 2 outer panels. You can see I have mine already pre-cut. You're also going to use the same pattern piece to create 2 fusible fleece cuts. I have already adhered my fusible fleece onto my exterior panels. These are going to be the exact same size. You're going to use pattern piece B to cut your vinyl accent. Now, cutting on the fold of vinyl can be very difficult, especially if you have very thick vinyl. One strategy is to place the pattern piece on your vinyl and go ahead and trace the entire half, and then make yourself a couple marks on the inside where the fold would be, and then just flip it, match up your marks, and continue tracing. This is the method I use for all of my vinyl pieces. You're going to need 2 of these vinyl cuts. Using pattern piece C, you're going to trace and cut on the fold 2 lining cuts. You can see here are my lining cuts. You're also going to do the same with your SF101 or woven fuse cotton interfacing. I have already interfaced my panels. When I interface with woven fuse, I like to cut the fabric out first and then just put the woven fuse on the back of the fabric and adhere it on with my iron, and then I'll cut it out from the woven fuse. For the pocket, you're going to use pattern piece D to cut out 2 lining panels, as well as 1 fusible interfacing. I already have my panels and my interfacing applied. In addition to those, you're going to have a D-ring strap, and this needs to be interfaced with SF101 or woven fuse. You're going to also have a large rectangle that will be used for the wristlet strap, also interfaced with your SF101 or woven fuse. And last but not least, you're going to need 2 pieces for your zipper tab. These are not going to be interfaced. These are just the exterior fabric. All right, so let's get started making this bag. So we're going to be starting on page 3, which is strap assembly. You're going to take your D-ring cut. And I'm not giving you the measurements for this because it is in the pattern. I do suggest you go and you download the pattern, and then you'll know the measurements for the D-ring strap that I'm referencing. Go ahead and flip your D-ring strap right side down. Finger press your D-ring strap in half with 2 long sides together. And then use your iron to create a nice press along that edge. Fold it open. and press the bottom edges up to that middle line to meet. Just like this. Use your iron to press these in place. Go ahead and fold it back on that original fold. Give it one last press. So now you have your D-ring strap. Take your D-ring and slide it over your strap. Fold your strap around the flat edge of your D-ring in half so that the ends meet just like this. I like to use a clip to just kind of hold it in place while I'm working. Now before we go to the sewing machine, let's go ahead and prep our wristlet strap as well. Grab your large rectangle that's going to be used for your wristlet strap and go ahead and fold it hot dog style so that the long edges are meeting wrong sides together. Just like this. Pretty side up. Or pretty side shown. Press that seam to help hold it in place. Go ahead and open your fabric back up and press the long raw edges to meet that center seam. I find it easier to do it one at a time. And then just fold the whole thing in half. Again, you might find this is very hot, so be careful, don't burn your fingers. Once again, I like to use little clips just to kind of clip the whole thing down. Don't sew this one just yet. So now we have a wristlet strap and our D-ring strap ready to go. Let's take our swivel hook and add that to our wristlet strap. Unpin half of it and slide your strap on in place. Now, before we sew all this together, the pattern suggests opening up your strap just like so that the swivel hook is on the middle, and then take the raw short ends of your strap and bring them up to meet. Now, pin them right sides together. What this is going to do is this is going to create a hidden seam in the strap so you don't have a big bulky raw edge hanging out. So now we have our wristlet strap ready to go and we have our D-ring strap. Now let's go to the sewing machine. So now we're going to go ahead and sew down the ends of the D-ring strap. So I like to start on the two folded edge first. I'm going to use a 3mm stitch length and a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and just go along the edge. I do not backstitch at the beginning or ends of these straps. So there is one edge. Now we're going to do the single folded side. Now you can take your D-ring and put it back on your strap. If you have a side of the fabric that you prefer to be showing, make sure that that side is on the same side as the rounded part of your D-ring. Fold it in half so that the raw edges meet. And now we're just going to sew this closed. You can go ahead and use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance going along this edge. And it can be a top stitch. It can be a 3mm or a 2.5mm stitch. It doesn't really matter. And there we go. Our D-ring is ready to be inserted onto our bag. Next, we're going to work with our wristlet strap. Remember, we already have the swivel hook attached. We're going to close up these ends. If you're referencing the pattern, we are now on page 4. We're going to use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and a 2.5mm stitch length. And we're going to go from one end to the other along this edge. Now you can just take this to your iron and open it up and press this seam open, just like this. I also find that if you just give it a really good finger press, that's good enough. After we have it pressed open, we're going to fold the long sides back in on themselves, meeting the middle, and then close it up once again. I like to go around the entire wristlet and just use some clips to make sure that none of the lines are wonky. Go. And just a quick sewing machine tip. A lot of sewing machines come with an extension table. These are really, really handy for quilting and for piecing, but for bag making, they actually get in the way a bit. So I make sure I always remove my extension table so that I have the least amount of space as possible right around my needle. With bags having curves, you really want to be able to get around the needle without having anything blocking you. So if you have an extension table, go ahead and take it off right now if you can, and continue on with the bag. It's just going to make it a little bit easier for you. Now we're going to stitch around the entire loop of our wristlet, making sure we move the swivel hook out of the way as we do it. Again, I like to start on the double folded side. Go nice and slow with this. We're going to use an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and a 3mm stitch length. I like to give a back stitch at the beginning and end of this, just because these won't be hidden in a seam anywhere. I like to make sure I back stitch. And go around the entire loop nice and slow. As you go, just keep moving your swivel hook out of the way. Once you reach the end, go ahead and give yourself a back stitch. So now that you have one side stitched down, we're going to do the same for the single folded side. Once again, using 3mm stitch length and 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, go around the entire circle. Go ahead and rotate your strap so that the swivel is on the outside. Rotate your strap around so that the seam is over by the swivel. Now my seam is so flat that if I tried to put it directly under the swivel, this is what I would get, and I don't like that. So I like to just kind of cockeye it a little bit so that the seam is right next to the swivel, but it's still nice and flat. And I am going to pin this with a couple clips. Now we're going to sew as close as we can to this bar without actually hitting it. To do this, I do suggest putting a zipper foot on your machine because that's going to let you get nice and close to this and make a nice little box just to secure this swivel hook in place so it's not flopping around on your wristlet strap. So I'm going to change out my foot from my standard foot to my zipper foot. Now you can create whatever kind of design you want right here. I like to do one line as close to the swivel as possible. Again, I'm using a 3mm stitch length, and I am going to backstitch at the beginning and the end of this work. And I'm just going to go straight across until I get to the other top stitch line, and then backstitch there. And then I cut off there so that I have one line going down. And then I just go up about 1/4 of an inch, and I do another straight line. Starting at the top, backstitching, going straight down. Once I get to the end, I backstitch again. And there we go. Now I just have a nice little double line to really secure my hook in place, and my wristlet strap is a nice size for me. So now you have your strap and your D-ring all ready to go for the bag. Put these to the side for now. Now we're going to begin exterior assembly, which is on page 5. Fold your exterior pieces right sides together and mark the midpoint using some sort of a fabric marker or a pencil or a mechanical pencil. You're going to do the top and the bottom of each exterior piece, just like so. Now take your vinyl accent pieces and do the same. Right sides together, fold them. And we're going to just mark the center. Now, vinyl doesn't really like to fold, so don't worry about folding the entire thing directly in half. That could kind of damage the look of it. Just pinch the top and give it a mark as best you can. If you used my method for cutting the vinyl, you probably already have a mark that's in the midpoint, but we can go ahead and just double check by lining up the little notches. And yes, those are good. So once you have your exterior and your vinyl pieces marked at the midpoint, we're going to assemble them together. Take one of your exterior pieces right side up, and I like to take one of my vinyl pieces right side up just so I can kind of have an idea of how this all has to go together. So this is the look that I want, and so this is how it's going to have to go, except this is going to be flipped right side to right side. So we're going to line up the midpoint of the vinyl with the midpoint of the exterior piece. You can kind of just look top and bottom just like that. Go ahead and take a clip and clip it in place. Now this is a little difficult, okay? Curved sewing is no joke. Curved sewing is my nemesis in quilting. I'm not a fan of it in bags. I want to let you know that one of the changes I make, which you can go to the end of the video to see, changes the exterior panel so that we don't have to do curved sewing. So if this is just something you are not into, go check out those timestamps down below and look at my alternatives for the exterior panel, and I'm going to show you how to top stitch this on instead of curved sewing it on. But for the sake of the tutorial, let's continue on with these dreaded curves. Go ahead and work your way to the side, stretching the exterior fabric as best as you can and moving that around since your vinyl is not going to give you a whole lot of give. and just try to line up edge to edge. Do the same for the other side. All right, once you have that pinned, go ahead and grab your other exterior panel and your second piece of vinyl and do the same thing. Again, kind of checking it out, making sure this is the design. You don't want to accidentally pin it on that way, even though it seems like that would be easier. It is wrong. Pin it on the difficult way. All right, you should now have both of your exterior vinyl panels pinned together. Let's go to the sewing machine and sew these together. All right, to stitch these together, we're going to use a 2.5 millimeter stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, it's personal preference if you're going to stitch it vinyl side up or exterior panel side up. I'm going to do vinyl side up this first go around, and then I'll do panel side up the second time just to show you the view difference. We're using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and end of this. And just work your way as slowly as possible. I like to go about an inch and then adjust my fabric just to make sure that my vinyl edge and my exterior edge are lining up properly. There's no big skewed wonkiness. Since it is curves in opposite directions, they do want to separate. Just use your fingers to keep them together. And go slow. Once you get to the end, you can see they like to split off a lot. Just go ahead and kind of yank that vinyl over to the edge and keep them together as best you can. Don't sew your finger. There you go. Make sure you backstitch at the end. And now when you lift it up, you can see when you turn it, it's going to want to go naturally like this. So we're not done with this yet. We still have to adjust this. But let's work on the second panel now. And like I said, we're going to do it exterior side up this time. I do think that this is going to be a little bit more difficult. Yeah, I can tell you right now that sewing this on with the vinyl on top is much easier than sewing this on with the exterior on top. Again, you can see at the end, this is very tricky. These just want to naturally separate. I like to lift up my presser foot and pivot my exterior fabric to meet up with the vinyl and then just slowly work it in there. And then make sure you backstitch. All right, once you have these sewn on, we're going to go ahead and clip the seams a little bit. We're going to make these little perpendicular clips to the seam. Make sure you don't actually cut the thread in the seam, and just go every, 1/2 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, just go along the edge. What this does is that when the bag is opened up properly, the seams can kind of twist on each other. They're not stuck in place. They can overlap each other to give you a really nice smooth finish. And they can separate as well as they need to. So go along the entire edge of the bag, giving it a little clip. All right, once you have it all clipped, just go ahead and open it up. Finger press it towards the exterior side. And what that means is that if you flip it over, your seam right here is pressed up against the exterior side. It's not pressed down against the vinyl side. It doesn't want to go against the vinyl side, right? Because this vinyl does not want to bend. So just let the seam go where it wants to go. So now we're going back to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch along this curved edge right here. We're going to be top stitching on the exterior fabric side. What top stitching is going to do is it's going to keep it nice and neat and in place, but it's also going to hold down the seam allowance against here so we don't ever have to worry about it twisting and going on the wrong side over by the vinyl. All right, when top stitching, I like to use a 3 millimeter stitch length, and I'm going to use about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the edge of this vinyl. I'm going to put my vinyl on the right to make it a little bit easier for me to see where my seam is. And I'm just going to go along the entire edge. I don't backstitch when I'm top stitching because this will be sewn into another seam. If you feel comfortable backstitching, go ahead and do that. And making sure you're pressing down this seam right here. It is kind of bulky with that extra fusible fleece in there. Just press it down as you go so that you don't have any strange shapes. There we go. We have our outer panels all ready to go. So we are now on page 6, and we're going to be working with the lining. First thing it suggests doing is taking your lining pieces and folding them wrong sides together in half, just like so, and mark the centers on the top. Now take your lining panels and just put those to the side. Take your pocket panels and place them right sides together and pin in place. Now mark yourself a 3-inch opening in the center on the top, the flat side of your pocket piece. So for the pocket, I started at the right side mark, making sure I backstitched. I used a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and a 2.5 millimeter stitch length to go entirely around the pocket until I reached the other mark where I then backstitched. Now we're going to trim this down to 1/8 of an inch. But when we trim down the seam, all we're going to do is trim where there's a stitch. This opening spot right here is going to remain at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. The rest of it is going to be an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I like to just start on one side. Give it a clip. So after trimmed down, it should look like this. Now let's go ahead and turn this right side out. If you need to, you can use some chopsticks or the eraser on a pencil or this thing, which is the purple thing, to just push out those corners a little bit neatly. There we go. Now we're going to go ahead and press this. And once we press it, we're going to also tuck in these extra long pieces from the opening. Give those a little tuck in like that and press the whole seam down just like this. When you're pressing, you just want to make sure that these seams are nice and straight. So you might have to kind of worm around with your finger a little bit or just stick your hand in there and run your finger along the seam. And that's going to help. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to close up this opening by using a top stitch. Our top stitch is going to be 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the top, and we're just going to go along the top just to close up that seam. And it's going to be a 3 millimeter stitch length. All right, and now it's ready to go on the lining of our bag. The pattern says to take one of your lining pieces right side up and take your pocket piece and just kind of eyeball it in the center. So that's what I'm going to do. And then use some pins to pin it in place. And now we're going to sew this on, starting from about 1.5 inches in on each side. We'll start on the right, go all the way around, and end on the left. Now, the point of this is to include those top stitches that we made earlier. So I'm going to measure about 1.5 inches from each side, and then I'm just going to put a pin there to remind me where to start and stop, like so. For this, I'm using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and a 3 millimeter stitch length. Alright, now it's time for finishing. You're going to grab both your zipper tabs, go wrong sides down, take the shorter ends, and match up shorter ends together, just like so. Give it a press. Now open it back up and match up those same ends with that middle press you just made. You can do them one at a time if easier. Press the other side down. There we go. Now fold it in half again and give it a little press. This is the same method we used for the D-ring and also for the wrist strap. Do the same with the other zipper end. Now your zipper ends are ready to be used. Grab your zipper and trim it down so that it is 9 inches long. Like I said, my zipper is on the long side, so I'm just going to trim one end. And then I'll trim 9 inches from there, making sure I don't trim off my zipper. Here we go. Now, before I get to the sewing machine, I'm going to put a clip on the ends of my zipper. Since I don't have a zipper stop here, if I'm not careful, my zipper is just going to fly right off of there. So I'm going to clip it just like that. I'm going to take my zipper tab and I'm going to put it around the end of my zipper and clip it down. I'm going to do the same with the other side. If you find it easier to go to the sewing machine and just sew a line right here on the end to hold this together, go ahead and do that. I'm okay holding it with my hand and then using a clip. All right, now let's take this to the sewing machine. So now using our 3mm length top stitch, we're going to go 1/8 of an inch from the very end of the zipper tape, going along the edge. Just like so. You can then turn around your zipper and again go 1/8 of an inch from the opposite side of the zipper tape. And do the same for the other side of the zipper. And now you can go ahead and take your scissors and trim off the excess sides of your zipper tabs. This just creates like a really nice polished look on the ends of your zippers. This is a good technique to use in most bags. Now take one of your lining panels and grab your zipper, fold your zipper in half, and mark the center. If you have a zipper like mine, which is black and a little bit harder to mark on, you can just take a pin and pin the center of it. Take your zipper right side up, which means the zipper, is pointing up. Line up the center of your zipper with the center mark on your lining panel and pin it in place. Now go along the edge of your lining and just pin the zipper along that curve. Do the same for the other side. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're just going to base stitch this down. That means that we're going to take about a 4mm stitch length and we're going to go 1/8 of an inch from the outer edge and just space this down. This is just going to keep the zipper in place so that it doesn't shift around on us when we're attaching the main panel. I'm going to do this off camera, but you'll see it's very simple. Okay, so you can see here's my basting stitch. It's this white line right here, and all it does is hold it in place. It's a very loose stitch. It's not something that's going to keep the bag together entirely. Now, take one of your exterior pieces and lay it right side down on top of your lining piece. Now, these should just match up nicely. I like to use clips to just kind of clip it in place. Now, let's take this to the sewing machine and sew it in place. Okay, make sure you have your zipper foot on your machine, and we're going to be using a 2.5mm stitch length. Start at the top of your panel, and we're going to use 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. And just go along the curve. As you go along, you're going to feel the zipper foot. Once you feel that, go ahead and lift your presser foot with the needle down and reach inside your bag to find your zipper. Now take your zipper and move it past the needle and out of the way. Put your foot back down and continue on with your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Since that zipper is already basted to the lining, it's not going to move out of place and you don't have to worry about the zipper kind of sneaking out of the seam. Go all the way to the end. Make sure you give yourself a back stitch at the end. Now take your pouch and give yourself a little bit of a clip along the edge, but don't clip your stitches. Again, with these curves, this just allows the fabric to fold over itself to give you a nice smooth edge along your zipper. Open up your bag so that you have right sides out. So now you can go to your iron and just press along this edge as best you can. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just want this as flat as possible so that when we top stitch, it's a little bit easier. All right, once it's pressed, let's go ahead and top stitch along the zipper. I'm going to change my stitch lengths to 3mm, and I'm going to use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to go from the top all the way along the edge. Now we're going to do the same with the opposite end. So grab your other lining panel and lay your zipper again right side up on the panel, matching the middle of your zipper with the midpoint that's marked on your lining. Line those up and pin in place. Go along the edge, continuing to pin. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to baste this in place. Again, about a 4mm stitch length and 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. now take your other exterior panel and lay your other exterior panel right sides down with the exterior panel. So right now we have exterior panel right side down with exterior panel. Match up the edges and clip in place. So now the sides should be nicely matched up as well. And we're going to go ahead and sew this on at 1/4 inch with a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. Once you get to that zipper foot again, go ahead and reach in, pull up your presser foot, move it out of the way, and then continue sewing. And once again, clip along the edge. So now open this up, right sides out, and then just press along this seam. This seam is a little bit trickier to press. Go ahead and open up your zipper and just give it the best press you can. Once you have that panel pressed, we're going to give it a top stitch. Go ahead and change your stitch length to 3. And this is going to be 1/8 inch from the edge closest to the zipper. And then just go along, making sure you're separating your zipper and your panels as you go. Now you have the nice rounded shape on the top of the bag. Now we're going to work on the darts. Now I'd never sewn darts before, so this was my first time working with this bag, and it took me a while to kind of understand what to do with these. This is where the pattern got a little frustrating because it pretty much just says sew the darts. I don't know what that means, so let's go through it. Take one of your darts, which are these little triangles you cut out, and place your fabric right side together. Line up the edges of that dart just like so, and clip. Now, let's sew this. I like to sew it at 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means that this line down here is going to line up with my 1/4 inch line on my presser, on my plate, but I'm actually going to start sewing all the way up at this diagonal, so I'll show you. I'm going to start sewing up here, but my edge is lined up with the 1/4 inch plate down here. I do a 2.5 millimeter stitch length, and I do a back stitch at the beginning and the end. Go all the way down, just like so, and give it a back stitch. Now we're going to do that for all 8 darts. So once again, right sides together. Line up that edge down here with the 1/4 inch on our foot, but start sewing all the way up on this fold up here. Give it a back stitch and continue on. Once you have all of your darts sewn, just trim them down to about 1/8 inch seam allowance. We just want to reduce the bulk, that's all. If you're following along in the pattern, we're now on page 9. You're going to grab your D-ring, and we're going to attach that to the outer panel. So the pattern says to go 1/2 inch from the top and leave 1/2 inch of the D-ring sticking out. It doesn't actually mention what to pin it to, but it's the exterior panel. So 1/2 inch from the top, sticking about 1/2 inch out, just like this. Go ahead and clip that in place. And now we're going to go ahead and base stitch this in place. I like to use a 3 millimeter stitch length for really thick fabrics like this. And you're just going to go along the edge. It's about 1/8 inch from the edge of the exterior panel. You're just trying to hold down this D-ring in place while you assemble the rest of the bag. All right, you can see that this is in place. Now we just have to assemble the bag. To finish up the bag, we just have to pin it all together. Open your zipper halfway or more. I like it a good amount open. And then take your exterior panels and place those right sides together, and your lining panels right sides together, just like this. Exterior panel sandwich, lining panel sandwich. Now, to make sure the bag looks right in the end, the biggest thing is to make sure that this seam right here where the exterior panel and the vinyl meet up matches up with both sides. So you can see I have my seam here and my seam here. I'm just going to match these up so that they align properly. And then I'm going to work the rest of the bag to work with that. So I'm going to go to the other side, do the same thing. This way the bag, whenever you put it together, it just wraps around really nicely. Like that. Now I'll go to my darts and pin those in place, and then just pin the middle. And right now I'm just working on the exterior panel. All right, now for the lining side, let's mark a 4-inch opening. I'm just going to use the grid lines on my cutting mat here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and here. All right, so that will be the opening for pulling out my bag in the end. And then I just start with the darts, line those up, and clip. And then I'll go around the side. So on the inside of the bag, you have your zipper fold right here. When you're pinning this, you want to fold these towards the lining side. So fold those edges towards the lining side and clip in place. Do the same on the other side. Take your edges from your zipper and fold them towards the lining side. All right, now we just have to sew this whole thing together. I'm going to start at the right side mark for on my lining for my opening, and I'm going to use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch it pretty well at the beginning and the end of this sewing because you will be turning everything through this hole. You don't want to rip a seam. So just go around the entire bag with 3/8 inch of seam allowance and a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And just go nice and slow around all these curves. You go over these bulky darts right here. It's helpful if you push one seam one side and the other seam to the opposite side so they kind of nest. It makes sewing over it much easier. Once you get to your second line, make sure you give yourself a really generous backstitch. Once you've stitched the entire bag, you're going to trim down the seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you're going to do that only where there are stitches. So the opening in the lining right here, we're not going to trim down that seam allowance. We're going to leave that bigger. So you can see the bag's been trimmed down and we just have this little pop-up over here for the lining. So now let's pull the bag out through that hole. So we have our bag and we're just going to pull out. Your zipper should be open. I told you to open it. I'm just going to pull all this out through that hole. I'm really sorry about the audio today, guys. The audio is just, the mic is just killing me today. So once you have it out, put your hand inside that hole to push out the edges of your vinyl. This is where we're at right now. And we have this hole in our lining. So I like to kind of press out the corners of the lining just like this from the inside. And then I take my holes and I just kind of tug in the middle like that. And that just pushes down those longer edges. And then I clip it in place just like this. And now I'm just going to top stitch this with a 3 millimeter stitch length at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just along that closing. All right, so you can see, barely see, top stitch. So now you just take it and shove it in there, just like that. Make sure if you have any like little crazy strings, trim them off. All right. So it's a super cute bag. So here's the matching strap. So you just clip it on to your D-ring. And there you go. See? Adorable. So this is a really, really, really cute bag. I have a couple of adjustments. I have a different way of doing the panel. I have different size options for the wristlets. I do feel like this is very bulky and very big. I don't think a 1-inch hook is necessary here. So that's the end of the complete walkthrough for the Clematis bag. If you would like to see some of my alternative options for it, stick around and I'm going to show you just a couple little options and where you would insert those in the bag pattern. I'm not going to walk you through a second bag. I'm just going to show you those steps and how you would change them. So let's talk about alternatives for another way to make this bag. The first alternative is going to be your D-ring and your wrist strap size. I wanted to make a strap and a D-ring holder using this very, very thick vinyl, but this vinyl does not like to double fold on itself like we did with the cotton woven vinyl. So for this, I actually cut the width in half. This is actually going to be 1.5 inches wide, and this strap will also be 1.5 inches wide. So when we build the strap, all we do is fold it in half once, and we do leave the raw edges showing on the strap and the D-ring. Another alternative to go with the new size of the strap is that I did not use a 1-inch swivel hook. I used a 3/4 of an inch swivel hook. I do like to keep my D-ring and my swivel hooks the same size. Since I used a 3/4 of an inch D-ring in the bag, I like to use the 3/4 of an inch swivel hook. The other big adjustment I made was with the exterior panel. So instead of using template A for the exterior panel, I actually used the lining template C, to build my exterior panel. And this gets a little bit more involved. So use template C to build your exterior lining panel. Then add woven interfacing to it, SF101 or woven fuse, something to keep this panel sturdy. After you've done that, use template A to cut out your fusible fleece. So exterior panel using template C, add SF101 to the back of it, use template A to cut out your fusible fleece, and then fuse on that fleece to the top of your exterior panel. So your exterior panel on the front should look the same exact size as your lining panel, and on the back it looks like this with the fusible fleece only on the top portion of it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our vinyl and we're going to line it up on the bottom of our new exterior panel piece and glue or pin in place. All we have to do now is top stitch this on and then continue construction of the bag like normal. Now, this is very sticky vinyl and can be difficult to top stitch. I'm going to show you my trick for doing that. First thing I like to do is get some glue. This is, fabric, fancy glue. You don't have to use this. Just get some Elmer's glue. And I'm going to glue down my vinyl piece. This just helps a little bit when I'm working with it. It's not going to hold it in place forever, but it's going to help while you're sewing it. And just line it up. You have your little darts on the bottom. Just line up the darts of the vinyl with the darts of your new exterior piece, just like so. And now let's go to the sewing machine. I'm going to show you how to top stitch this on to your panel. And I'm also going to show you how to do the D-ring and the swivel hook straps at the sewing machine with this very sticky vinyl. So the trick with this sticky vinyl is to have the right tools. If you have a silicone presser foot, that's going to be great right now. If you don't worry about it. What you want to use is some parchment paper. This is just basic parchment paper I got from Publix. Doesn't matter what brand, just parchment paper. So I'm still using the same 40 weight thread. Here is my panel for my D-ring, and I'm going to fold it hot dog style. Now remember, this is a smaller piece of fabric than the original D-ring in the pattern because I'm not double folding it. I'm just going to fold it once and be done. I'm okay with these raw edges. If you're not, then this method is not for you. Tear off a small piece of parchment paper and put it underneath your fabric. Fold over some of the parchment paper to meet up with the edge of your vinyl. And you can just add that to the pin. The big thing is you want to be able to see the edge of your fabric. So make sure the parchment paper doesn't cover that. So now you have a little vinyl parchment paper sandwich. Sew over the parchment paper. Add an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance using a 3mm stitch length. All the way down just like so. Peel off your parchment paper. Do the same for the other side. You might be able to just see your vinyl through it. And then go ahead and remove the paper. So now you have your vinyl D-ring holder. So you're going to do the same thing for the wrist strap. Another option so that you don't have to use the parchment paper on the top is to use a walking foot. Walking feet actually don't stick to the vinyl terribly bad as long as the entire walking foot's not on it. So go ahead and pinch your wrist straps so that the long ends are wrong sides together and it's all right side out. Grab some parchment paper and put it underneath. And then go along the side at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance using a 3mm stitch length. And you can see that walking feet don't stick to the vinyl as long as both of these aren't on it. If you put both of these on top of the vinyl, you do have a problem with it sticking. But with just one of the feet on there, it's not a problem. And there we go. Now you have a super sticky vinyl wrist strap. Now let's talk about how to put the vinyl on the outer panel. So the outer panel is going to work in much the same way as the straps did. The presser foot, as long as it's only half on it, is fine. Once you get to this side, it does become a problem, and I do find that I need to put parchment paper on the top of the vinyl, so I'm going to show you how to do that. Luckily, we don't need any parchment paper on the bottom of the vinyl because, you know, it's just fabric sticking down here. So again, I'm using a top stitch of 3mm at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I like to start on the bottom and go around. Once you get to this dart over here, I just lift up my needle, lift up my presser feet, go across, and keep going. We're just basting it in place, so it's okay to not put the entire dart under the needle. Once we get to the top stitching of the top of it, I do find I need to get paper. Now, I like little shreds of paper that I use to just line up with the side as I go. I want to be able to see the side, but I also need to make sure my presser foot doesn't stick to it. So I just use small scraps. And once I can't see it anymore, I peel it off, lift up my presser foot, and continue on. Just like this. Now this is just difficult like this because of the type of vinyl I'm using. If you're using a not so sticky vinyl, you're not going to have to go through all this extra effort. And just continue along the edge like this. Again, going over that dart, lifting up your needle, skipping over it, and continuing on. So your wristlet strap is now like this. Now you can see in the pattern, it says to leave the ends open, sew them right sides together, flip them around, that whole thing. But since we decided to change it, we can't actually do that. So what we do instead is we take our swivel hook and we put it on our strap. And then we take our ends and we put them together so that the hook is in there in the middle, like a little baby in a basket. See that? So we just meet the ends like this, and we're going to sew these together at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Since we're working with sticky vinyl, we're going to need to make sure we put some parchment paper down underneath. Now go ahead and put a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance stitch on here, just like so. And now you should have the ends closed up and the hook on the inside. Flip everything to the right side out so that the hook is now on the outside and the seams are now on the inside. If you need to trim off some of these crazy threads, go ahead and do that. Take your hook around to meet where that seam is. Tuck it in just like that and pinch it closed. Now we're just going to sew a couple lines right here to enclose that raw edge and keep that hook in place. Again, make sure you have parchment paper underneath and just get as close as you can. The walking foot does okay on small portions of vinyl. You see, now we have it just tucked in like that. I like this look, so I'm going to leave it like that, but if you wanted, you could make a nice little box or another line or an X, whatever you wanted. But this is how you would do the strap instead of the thick strap that they did in the pattern. When doing your D-ring, just add your D-ring to your D-ring strap like so, just like in the pattern. Pinch the ends together. Make sure you have a small scrap of parchment paper underneath the fabric, and go ahead and baste that together so that you can add it to the bag. Take it out, remove the paper, and trim all these crazy strings to the best of your ability. So there we have it, the Clematis bag. I mean, it's a cutie. It's really, really cute. I can't say I'm not going to use these. Like, I'm using these if I get to keep them. People end up stealing my stuff a lot. So this is a great bag, and it is a good beginner bag. I mean, it's an extreme accomplishment. It's very rewarding. It's useful. It's beautiful. It's a great beginner bag. I just feel like the pattern is missing some information for true beginners. So I hope this video helped you. Make sure you check out Debbie Hunker's video as well. She walks you through every single step with lots of amazing tips. I hope that my alterations maybe helped you if you were struggling. You can really mix up how you work with this. You can use vinyl, you can use cork, you can use leather, you can use whatever you want. It's gonna look awesome. So I hope you have a great week. Get out there and make something. Bye.